Welcome to another video. Today we're gonna talk about notation or how to read moves in chess. So be ready and let's go. So far we learned the chess pieces symbols, the chessboard squares names, and check and mate. So right now it is the time to learn about the notation or how to read and write the moves in chess. So the first reason for notation is to record our moves and then we can review our games, or we can review the other players' games through the notation. Here for example we take our rook from d1 to somewhere like d5. So how we can record this move? First of all, we are using R because it is beginning of rook, and we write d1 which is first square, and then dash, and then d5 which is last square. So this is how we can write our move. So R d1 dash d5. Here suppose we are moving our knight from g2 to e3. So first we are writing N as beginning of the knight, and then G2 which is first square, dash E3 which is last square. For capturing we are using cross or a small X. So here if we take the black pawn, so we can record the move as N which is beginning of the knight, and then G4 which is first square, cross which means capturing, and then f6 which is last square. So here we are not mention which piece we are captured, just it is important to mention the last square. Here white castle, king side or short castle, so we coded as 0-0 or 00. And for example white castles, queen side or long castle, so we recorded as 0-0-0 or 000. For checkmate we are using hash or hashtag. So here if we go to G7 and giving to the black checkmate, we can record it as Q which is beginning of the queen, G1 which is first square, dash G7 which is last square, and then hash or hashtag which means checkmate. For pawn we are not using P as beginning of the pawn, just we will put the first square dash last square. For example here if we go to A4, we can record it as A2 dash A4. A game is usually written in two columns and we are using numbers as order of the moves. We are using left column for white moves and right column for black moves. So let's record a short game. So first of all, for example, we are taking our pawn from E2 to E4. So we put 1 as first move, and in left column we put E2 which means first square, dash E4 which means last square, and then in right column for black, for example we put E7 dash E5 which means he took his pawn from E7 which is first square, dash E5 which is last square. And then for example we are taking our bishop from F1 to C4. So second move B which means bishop, F1 which means first square, dash C4 which means last square. And then black take his knight from B8 to C6. So second move in right column we put N which means knight, B8 which is first square, dash C6 which is last square. And then for example we are taking our queen to H5. So third move in left side we put Q which means queen, D1 which means first square, dash H5 which means last square. And then for example he will attack to our queen by his knight. So in right column we put N which means knight, G8 which means first square, dash F6 which means last square. And then suppose we are taking our queen to F7 and giving the black checkmate. So in left side we will put Q which means queen, H5 which means first square, cross or a small X which means taking, F7 which means last square, and then hash or hashtag which means checkmate. So far, what I show you is long notation. In long notation, we are using first square dash last square. But there is another method of notation, which is called abbreviated notation. In abbreviated notation, we just use the last square and we are not putting first square. So let's review the game once again in abbreviated notation. So first move, in left side, we just put E4, and in right side, we put E5. Second move, in left side, we put B C4, and then in right side we put N C6. In third move we just put Q H5, and in right side we just put N F6. And finally in fourth move, in left side we put Q cross F7 hash, which means queen taking F7 pawn and giving checkmate to black. Sometimes we can take both rooks or both knights in the same square. So how we can differentiate it between these two? Easily we can use long notation. So here suppose we are taking our A1 rook to D1. Easily we can put R, which means rook, A, which means the rook which was in A5, and then D1, which means last square. So here suppose we are taking our G1 rook to D1. In that case, we can put R, which means rook, G, which means the rook which was in G5, and then D1, which means last square. Here, both rooks can taking this knight. So suppose we are taking that with this rook. So we will put R, which means rook, 7, which means the rook which was in 7 rank, cross, which means taking, and finally B5. Or suppose we are taking this knight with this rook. So we are using R, which means rook, 2, which means the rook which was in second rank, cross, which means taking, and finally B5. In notation, we are using many other symbols as well. For example, exclamation mark means a good move. Double exclamation mark means excellent move. Question mark means bad move. Double question mark means a blunder. Exclamation mark and then question mark means a move deserving attention. Question mark and then exclamation mark means a dubious move. And 3 dot means the move which is followed by black. EP means en passant. So let's review this game. For example, we taking our knight to F7 and giving check to black king. So we will put 1 and then N, which means knight, and then F7, which is last square, and then plus, which means check. So suppose black, he will take his king to G7. So in right side we will put K G8, which means king to G8. Here suppose we will go to H6 and giving the black king double check. So we will put 2 and in left side N, which means knight, H6, which means last square, and plus, which means check. So here black will go to H8. So in right side we will put K, which means king, H8, which means last square. And then suppose we will taking our queen to G8 and giving check to black king. So we will put 3 as third move. In left side we will put Q G8, which means last square, and plus, which means check. So the only move that black can do is taking our queen by the rook Of course, he cannot take our queen by his king, as our queen is protected by our knight. So he will take our queen by rook. So in right side, we will put on, which means rook, cross, which means taking, g8, which means last square. Finally, we are taking our knight to f7 and giving checkmate to black king. So we will put 4, which means fourth move, n, which means knight, f7, which means last square, and hashed, which means checkmate. Let's review another short game. First move, in left side, we will put f3, which means we taking the pawn to f3 square, and then in right side, e5, which means black taking his pawn to e5, and then second move in left side, g4, which means we taking our pawn to g4 square, and then in right side, q, h4, and hashed, which means black taking his queen to h4 and giving checkmate to our king. Of course, here we cannot move our king to this square, and we cannot protect our king, and we cannot taking the queen. So it is checkmate. So let's review another short game. First move in left side, e4, and in right side, c6. Second move in left side, d4, and in right side, d5. Third move in left side, n, c3, and in right side, d, cross, e4. D, which means the pawn which was in d file, cross means taking, and finally e4, which means last square. And then fourth move in left side, n, cross e4, means knight taking e4 pawn. And then in right side, n, d7, which means knight going to d7 square. Q, e2, means queen going to e2 square. And in right side, n, g, f6. As here, we can taking both knights to f6. We are using n, which means knight, g, which means the knight which was in g file, and finally f6, which means last square. And finally, as sixth move, n, d6, and checkmate. Here, of course, black cannot move his king, and he cannot take our knight by e7 pawn, as it is protected the king from our check. So it is checkmate. So our move will be n, d6, hash. So this is all about notation. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and share it with your friends. See you in next video.